Hello, this is a video on factoring, and factoring definitely shows up in several ways on the SAT, every exam I've ever seen. And I'm going to show you some sample questions to show you how it could possibly show up. So you see the most obvious example is on the screen already, which is just a quadratic equation that's set up for you to factor. And I just want to point out, you should have already seen the foiling video. And when we foil, we start with a series or two parentheses, and then we foil or multiply out each of the numbers or letters by each other, and we end up with a quadratic equation like this one here. Okay, so in this case, it would be x squared plus 3x plus 2, right? So we go from here to here. Factoring, we're starting, it's the opposite procedure. We're starting with the quadratic and we're factoring out to that set of parentheses. Okay, so the first thing we do is we split the x's, one here and one here, because we know that when we FOIL, we do our first multiplication, x times x is indeed x squared. Okay, the next step is we look at the last number, the standalone number. And we look at 12 and we say we need two factors of 12, right? Two numbers that multiply together to equal 12, but they also have to add to 7. And that would be 3 and 4. 3 and 4, when you multiply them, you get 12. When you add them, you get positive 7. All right. The next step in factoring is you set always these parentheses equal to 0, and then you set each of the parentheses by itself equal to 0. And then simply solve for x. So we subtract out 3 from each side, we get x equals negative 3. We subtract out 4 from each side, we get x is negative 4. And these would be our two answers. Okay, so that would be the simplest. Now, what if you get into a situation where you can't do that? Okay, you can't quite factor it right. All right, so let me give you a more complicated example. Let's say we have something like 3x squared plus 12x plus 6 equals 0. Now, the first thing you want to do is, it's really hard to factor with a coefficient here. So if you can, you want to divide every single thing out by some common number. In this case, everything is divisible by 3. So you have to divide every single number by the 3. And we're going to bring it over here. So the 3's are going to cancel out. We're going to get x squared. We're going to get a 4x and a positive 2. And that still equals 0. Okay, so now the next step is we're going to separate out those x's, and we need two numbers that go into 2. Well, only a 1 and 2 go into 2. That's it. It's our only choice. But we have a problem because 1 and 2, no way added together are going to equal 4. So we can't factor this. So what do? Well, my friend, this is where the quadratic formula comes in. Now, depending on the score that you're going for in math will depend on whether you decide, if you don't already know the quadratic formula, whether you want to memorize it. But I'm going to go through it here because it's not a bad idea to know it. So I'm just going to write it down, and then I'll just walk you right through it. Okay, so we've got negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac, and the whole thing is over 2a. Now, let me explain. So for this equation, we have an implied 1 here, okay? So this is a. The number attached to the x squared is always a. The number attached to the x is always b. And the standalone number is c. So what we do is we just plug in all of those numbers right into here. And I'll just do it in this new color. So we get a negative 4 plus or minus 4 squared minus 4. A is 1 and C is 2. And then it's all over 2 times A is 1. Okay, so I'm going to bring it down here. We got negative 4 plus or minus 16. This is 16, and this is minus 8. 16 minus 8 is 8, and the whole thing is over 2. Okay, now we can reduce this. This number here over 2 is going to be negative 2, plus or minus, and the square root of 8, we can just leave it as square root of 8 over 2, or we're getting into, well, you know what? I'm just going to leave it there. Yeah, I think I'm just going to leave it there for now because we're getting a little bit out of the realm of factoring. Okay, so anyway, here are your choices. You either get to factor like we did up here, or we get to use the quadratic formula if you can't factor. That's it. Okay, so now let's see. What other variations could there be? All right, well, here's one. I'm going to clear the decks here. Okay, so let's say we have a fraction that needs to be factored. Some portion of it needs to be factored. So let's say we've got this problem, and they're telling us they want us to solve for x, but they're saying for what value of x is this fraction undefined? This is a good thing to know because an undefined fraction means that the denominator equals 0. All right, so if they're saying for what value of x is this fraction undefined, what we do is we set the denominator equal to 0. And now we have factoring as we've seen it, right? So we set our 2 parentheses, and hopefully we can factor this. We separate out those x's, and we're coming up with 2 numbers, 2 factors that go into 10 and that add to 3. That's going to be 5 and 2. Now, in order to add to positive 3, we're going to have a positive 5 and a negative 2, and that's good because we want it to multiply to negative 10. So we need a positive and a negative. We set these both equal to 0 and subtract out the 5. We get x is negative 5. Add the 2, and we get x equals 2. And that's that. Okay, so that's a good one to know, that undefined business. Okay. Now, there's one other problem I would like to go over. All right. It's hard to draw a straight line with a pen. Okay, so let's say we have a situation. I think I'm going to do this in a different color. We've got y equals x minus 11 squared. And we also have y equals 25. These both show up in a problem. Now, it doesn't matter. There could be a word problem. There could be a problem that says anything. But if it includes these 2 elements, if we have 2 things equal to y, you can set them equal to each other. So we've got x minus 11 squared equals 25. There are 2 ways to do this problem. And let's say we're supposed to solve for x in this, okay? Well, I'm going to write this out in the 2 ways. Okay, so let's start with the factoring method. So first we have to FOIL and then we'll factor. All right, so we've got x times x is x squared. X times negative 11 is negative 11x. Negative 11 times x is another negative 11x. And negative 11 times negative 11 is positive 121, and it equals 25. So now we're going to start to combine our like terms. Negative 11 minus 11 is negative 22x plus 121 equals 25. Now, if you remember, if you look over here, we're always trying to make it equal to 0. So we're going to subtract out that 25. And we get x minus 22, x squared, sorry, minus 22x plus 96 equals 0. Now we can factor. Now we have some high numbers here. It's going to be a little bit harder. So the x part's easy, but now we have to come up with two factors of 96. So I'm going to do it over here. I'll consider this my scratch paper. So this is what I do when I have a number and I don't automatically know what all the factors are. I set up two columns and I start 1 times 96. I'm just making a list of the factors. 2 goes into 96 48 times. 3 goes into 96 32 times. 4, I don't think goes into it. 5 does not. 6 does, because 2 and 3 both go into it. So 6 goes into 96 16 times. Okay, so I'm going to stop for a second. And I have some factors. I'm not sure if there are any more factors than this, but I want to make it add to negative 22. And this set of factors adds to 22. So I'm going to put the 6 and the 16 in. We want a positive 96 and a negative 22. So I'm going to make them both negative. And again, we set each parentheses equal to 0, and we're going to get x is 6 and x equals 16. Now, I want to show you a faster way, and even though it's a shortcut, there is a catch. So if you don't get the catch, it could mess you up. You could, if you see this, actually square root both sides. What you do to one side, you have to do to the other. And if you notice that 25 is a perfect square and this is squared, you can square root it and the square root cancels out the square. So you just get x minus 11 equals, most people think of the square root of 25 as being 5. But the truth is it's plus and minus 5. So you actually come up with x minus 11 equals 5, and x minus 11 equals negative 5. So if we're going to solve for x, we're going to get x equals 16, and we're going to do the same thing over here. We get x equals 6. So we get the same answers as we do over here. This is just slightly shorter, and you have less math to do. You don't have to do this big factor thing over here and figure out all that. Okay, so that is what I've got for factoring. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.